James, that was a very, very generous introduction, and I'm kind of glad that happened. It forced James to say something nice about me for once ever, but I appreciate that. Not never. He said many nice things, but thanks, James. That really meant a lot. I'm gonna just read for I don't know, about 30 or so minutes here, and then I'd be happy to chat with people afterwards. And I'm going to be reading from the last poetry collection. I have a new collection coming out next year, but which I've been reading from a little bit. So maybe I might read a few poems from that collection too. I haven't learned how to read those yet, if that makes sense. You know, we've been in COVID the entire time, and I've been doing events like this, and of course, ironically, I never caught COVID through all of that until now. And so I haven't really practiced reading a lot of those in person. But I wrote a lot of those during the pandemic. So maybe I'll touch on those in a little bit, but I'm going to start from the last book, and I'm going to start with the actual epigraph to the book, which it was a really kind of a mind-bending quote from this archaeologist by the name of Francois Bordet. In his book, The Old Stone Age, there's a chapter called The Paleolithic in America, right? And Bordet is sort of my understanding. I'm not an expert in this area, but my understanding is that his work kind of gave us a lot of our understanding of arrowheads and little artifacts and archaeological artifacts that date back to the Stone Age. And in that chapter, he has this really kind of extraordinary quote. The book came out in the 60s, I want to say. And so you'll forgive the gender not neutral. The language is not gender neutral. And so I had to put little 6 in brackets after each instance of his use of man and mankind. But the quote is still kind of a fascinating one. He's talking about the arrival of humans in the Americas, which were, of course, not the Americas. They were not called that for tens of thousands of years later. However this may be, the conquest by modern man of a virgin and habitable continent was an adventure unique in human history. There can be no repetition of this until mankind lands on a planet belonging to another star. And I thought that was kind of weirdly mind-boggling. And again, pardon the use of virgin and habitable continent. You can tell how dated the language is, but just that arrival, that landing on a completely new hemisphere, and we don't know quite when that happened. 30,000 years. Every couple of years, there's new research that comes out that dates it even further and further back in history, but that will not be repeated until if the species lands on a planet belonging to another star. So for somebody who loves sci-fi and things like that, this was a weird, the quote was a weird conflagration of conflagration of two different ideas that were kind of cool. So that's the epigraph for the collection. And then it leads right into the first poem, which is called Country Western, but there's a comma between country and Western. And I was thinking about, that landfall, that making landfall, and the way that immigrants make that landfall in this sort of Western space. And so, I was trying to think of all the different versions of that arrival in the so-called New World and what makes it different for people like my parents who were immigrants here versus all those other versions of arriving. And so I was thinking about my parents. I was thinking about a lot of different people when I wrote this poem. So Country Western. Via carriage and steamer and saddle and rail, via twin prop and airship and ship of the desert, via savanna, via steppe, via zipline and glider, under moat and over rampart, over barb and under wire, over 3 green seas, via burrow, via grapple, via ballistic trajectory, like broke satellites cratered in alien dirt, like banged knuckles on the door of an uneasy speakeasy, We were the party after the party nobody wanted. Sober and famished, we were the parched fronds, beggared and supplicant to the clouds cool and distant as a bourgeoisie, and we without our sleet coats, and we without our hail hats, with less than a shekel, less than a rupee, less than a kroner or any glinting Kennedy, 3 pence short of a peso, we arrived over guard and under sentry, via catapult, via coyote, via many genies blinking. We arrived bats in a manse no bat should inhabit. So we grew fin and we grew talon. We scrambled arachnid and jaguared in the canopy, dissembled, reassembled, and it's true we piss now in marbled closets and shower indoors as if we are clergy. It's true no junta defiles us, no furious bomber or hegemon's boot, but the faces on the currency all watch me. The paintings in the museum say, this is life on earth, this is life on earth. So I'm jealous of their candor, but that isn't my pasty duchess. That isn't my butchered Messiah. That isn't my bounty of meat beside the gilded chalice. I'm no Medici, and that isn't my life on earth. I arrived in via wormhole, via subspace, via mothership descending, in a snap button sarong, in a denim sari, in my 10-gallon turban. I look so authentic you'd almost believe it's the 44th of July. And I'm the sheriff of this here cow town. I'm one ace better than a straight flush. Buzzards above the valley. I can see the whites of your eyes. My name is Consuela. You can call me Mr. President. You can reach for the sky. So I thought, that was just sort of like a weird way of mashing up all these immigrant narratives. And so when I read from this collection, I kind of tend to read the same poems a fair amount. And I tend to pick them because they're kind of more fun to read out loud than some of the other ones. So I'm gonna read, or maybe I'll do some different ones today. How about that? So I was thinking, and since we were talking a little bit before the reading started about Chicago, I'm gonna read all the poems that have references to bars in Chicago for James. But I was thinking on the other kind of flip side of that immigrant narrative. I wrote this poem thinking about the idea of an American being forced to be a refugee elsewhere, and kind of trying to imagine what that would look like, because we're so accustomed in our political debates to not want refugees or immigrants here, right? At least, I mean, not universally, but that's what the debate is often about. And so I was trying to kind of envision the tables being turned. Somebody from here, maybe somebody who looked a little bit like myself or somebody else, forced to go to another place. And this is a poem kind of giving advice to that person, preparing them for that. It's called Prepping the Exile. Concede now your ordinary gripes, your standard evasions, the idiots texting while snarling your rush hour, your escapes via back roads you best know for a happy hour at the Gold Star, the Black Rock, dinner, then nightcaps at the Green Mill, till pre-dawn raises its gray sail in a window of the house where you keep your things. You'll need new things you can't even begin to Costco, to crate or to barrel. Forget now your kitsch and granite kitchen, your Home Depots and Free Peoples, the soft power of a staycation and owning a Roomba in the sumptuous green of oak leaves crowning the streetlights of your town. This is not your town. Nobody here woos you. No needy here needs you. The local kids beef, their mouths a bazaar of adenoid, slur, and molar. Though you learn their fan dances, dress yourself in their oils and attire, articulate a grammar that doesn't pronounce you. Their lexicon has no word for you, but you mustn't despair. The night is young. The snake houses still open. Now straighten your necktie, Professor. Raise up your rickshaw and give us a ride. there were a lot of people who came from India who were doctors and have spent a lot of years since driving taxi cabs. And that's kind of what I was thinking about as that poem came to an end, that if you took a professor of English and put them in a different country where English wasn't needed and poetry wasn't, or American poetry wasn't relevant, I don't know what I would do. I mean, presumably I'd figure something out, but it might just be, driving a rickshaw. So I'm gonna bounce to I gave the talk earlier, and I was talking about writing poems that include language that, I always try to include words in every poem that I haven't included in earlier poems. And it's very weird to read these poems from a book that was published a few years ago, that I wrote many years ago, because then I realize how much I'm constantly just mimicking and imitating myself. Like, no matter how much you try to sound different, you always end up sounding like yourself. But one of the things that I try to do is get words into poems that don't usually go in poems. And part of the fun of that is like getting names and other kinds of things in. But this is a poem that does a little bit of that, but it's the first love poem that I wrote for my now wife. And it kind of is a mashup of a bunch of different things. I'd just never been kind of that much in love. And when I wrote this poem, and it was just sort of a really kind of amazing moment in my life, and yet there was like everything going on in the world at that time, which continues to be the case now, right? And so this is a poem called Epistemic Love Poem, and it was kind of born of this quote from the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein in his book Philosophical Investigations, where he has this really like kind of oddly obvious point that he makes, which is that if there were a verb meaning to believe falsely, it would not have any significant first person present indicative. So there's no way to say like the opposite of I believe something, meaning that I falsely believe something, right? So there's no word for that, and there's no way to kind of articulate like I disbelieve in QAnon, which would mean I believe in QAnon, but I falsely believe in QAnon. Like it'd be there's no word for it. So I was trying to mess with that idea, and this is the poem that came out. And I wrote it for my now wife, who's in the other room, probably exhausted from taking care of all of us who are sick of COVID. Epistemic Love Poem. In Crimea now, the larks might be muzzled by artillery and crap weather. How should I know? In Haifa now, the guns must be running. I have no idea. In Kobani, a boy is waxing a Kalishnikov. A boy is wading in a blood puddle. I don't know. I'm not in Missouri. I'm not in Humboldt Park or Harlem. I'm here with you, wrought simple and plain happy. The only city I know is your city block, your boulevard between the German bar and the orthodontists. The only city I know is the square of sidewalk your shadow paints. Everywhere else is switched off now, every current stilled. The Gulf Stream is in sleep mode, its porpoises unplugged, its seagulls powered down, dangling from clouds that are stuck static in their full upright and locked positions. No carbon is there baking the human sky. No typhoon, no Ebola churning. No Donald Trump is there in his White Office. No Mitch McConnell in the garret of his own brain case. No Pope infallible, no Lama enlightened, no Ayatollah knows what I know now I know you. And no, I don't call you darling. I don't call you honey or sugar or babe, those names made for other bodies, those noises lamed by other people. And the other bodies are switched off, slack mannequins on trolley cars, in Hondas, in jets stopped over Crimea, over Kobani and Haifa. Everyone dumbstruck everywhere, still as a book on a shelf. If it isn't written by you, I won't read it. If it isn't about you, I won't own it. I won't call you bunny or sweetheart or pumpkin. Now I know you are my wild earthquake, my ontological kazoo, my dizzy robin of ghost feathers. Your voice is a brontosaur. It's bigger than everything. Your mind is bigger than mine. It frightens me. But I kiss your shins and shoulders now. I kiss your hips. It's like kissing rainwater. Though I know no rain exists if it isn't kissing your face. I'm being ridiculous, I know. But my chest is a rowboat rolled over and over. My chest is a boulder. The boulder crashed through the floodlight of my chest, and I believe falsely now no horror exists. I believe falsely no other joy exists. I believe in every love song. Now every love song is wrong that doesn't know you, my transcendental teacup, my butter knife in a light socket. You are my space plane, my only space plane. I do dare to eat a peach. I do dare disturb the universe. And if the universe turns out to be a false front, if the universe is a figment in a dog's eye or the dog brain of some other universe, I don't need to know. Now I know you. I don't know. I don't need to know. So yeah, so then we got married and I wrote this poem for the wedding. So I'm going to read this. I have no idea why I'm just reading poems that I don't usually read at readings because this feels like a fun and safe space with some friendly faces on the Zoom call. So yeah, I wrote a poem for our wedding and I was, I'm sure my in-laws were like, what the hell is she doing marrying this weirdo? Because this was not the kind of poem I think you think of when you think of a wedding poem. But I'm just going to read it. I don't think it needs much explanation unless it's got a bunch of conspiracy theories referenced in it. So I'll just, and this was pre-QAnon, so I didn't drop that one in. But the wedding poem. Is it your fallout shelter? Is it your diesel generator? Is it the truth in your pamphlets, your incontrovertible alien and undeniable Sasquatch? Is it your stockpile of spam and ammo or the campfire's gleam crinkled in the dome of your aluminum hat that so beguiles me? Woe, those Saskatchewan nights I huddled without you, my camera on a hair trigger, my motion sensors tensing. I listened for your ghost dogs baying in the hollows, for your poltergeist banging in my barn loft. I waited for your landing lights igniting my tree line, for your tractor beam to abduct, dissect, and erase me. Those years alone with my Ouija board, I pleaded for you to hijack my airwaves, to come invade my Winnebago, come body snatch me. I demanded a simple proof of you. Your puff of smoke drifted over my grassy knoll. Your Freemasons peeking into my Bohemian grove, but the specter of you I couldn't capture, so no one believed me. Your signals and the noise I couldn't decipher, and no one believed me. Nobody ever believed me until you believed me. Now my skull and bones inducted into the conspiracy of your company, your Opus Dei inviting my Illuminati. Now you are real, so I am real. Now shudders the zombie night. The end is nigh, only you believe me. Now divvy up the jerky, my heart. Ration out the trail mix, my one and only. I'll bolt the cellar door. You load the crossbows. I have no idea what happens next. So I think I wrote that in a realizing that like anytime you fall in love with somebody and decide to like, you know, spend your life together, it is kind of a weird conspiracy theory. Like you both, for no very good reason, believe this is just going to work, you know? And so I just started riffing off of that and looked up, I remember spending like, I don't know how much time looking at Wikipedia pages for all these random conspiracy theories and what they were, just because I wanted to use the names to, but I didn't know, like, I don't know what Opus Dei is. I have no idea, but you know, it's in there. We were talking about a bar in Chicago that that James and I guess we could say we love that bar, but it's, you know, it's not the greatest place in the world, but we liked it. But I'd never written until this book, I'd never really written a poem like about that kind of like bar life, you know, that sort of bar culture. And so I wanted to write a bar poem. And you know, when you're at a bar, and especially when you're around, when you're drinking and other people are drinking, you argue about a lot of dumb stuff, right? That can't really be resolved, and everybody's certain they're right. And so I guess this is just a poem about those arguments, and kind of having fun with kind of mixing up cultures and languages and things like that too. But really, it was just born because of like talking, like having a frustrating conversation with this friend of mine at a bar, and then decided to write about it. It's called The Bar Poem. And if it turns out Lahore is at the proximate center of a cloud-shaped multiverse, if every universe a droplet, every moth in Punjab, the mortal flicker of another life, if there's an other life, this trig and nova show just a third or 33rd expansion of a boundless quantum mud, and there aren't any mountain spirits, no papacy or patron saints logging our masturbations, you mulling boneheaded sermons in erroneous temples, me resting on the wrong day, pleading at an incoherent altar. And if the space gurus arrive, curing unemployment and angst, if they confirm the definitive merits of deregulation, but also the indispensable covenant of a social safety net, if they affirm Otis Redding is better than the Beatles or the Stones, Bach pedantic, Lata Mangeshkar more intricate than Ovid, and of course Anne of Green Gables over Harry Potter, of course Michael over LeBron, of course Serena. And yes, the milk past its sell-by date is fine, and no, you don't look fat in those pants, but the gecko tat and tongue stud in 98 were a bad idea. But there's no such thing as 98, and you were wrong about Tupac, right about kumquats, wrong about Nietzsche, and if the unearthly Ubermenschen arrive in their Jesus-shaped starship to say they've been watching us a long time, that we are critical as paperclips, redeemable, but nearer to the apes than the angels, will you finally put your beer down, Bernardo, settle your tab, and walk the brief hushed blocks home? It was a metaphysical argument that we had gotten into about the afterlife. It got a little bit out there. So how am I doing on time? I have a little bit of time left. Okay. So I'm going to read, I guess I'll read two more poems from this book. This one is called Station, and it was inspired by a quote from Rick Steves of Rick Steves Europe on PBS, if you have ever watched that show. And we were randomly watching it, and he said this really weird thing that I thought was kind of memorable. I've never been to this place, Gimmelwald, which is the town that he references, but he says of it, on a sunny day, you understand why people say, if heaven isn't what it's cracked up to be, send me back to Gimmelwald, which apparently is a saying in this town in Switzerland. And so it's from the Switzerland's Jungfrau region Best of the Alps episode. And I found it on his blog, so I have the quote exactly right. But so I was thinking about alternatives to heaven, and thinking about, backpacking in Europe, which I got to do when I was younger. So Station. Send me back, heaven. Send me back to Alphorn, Wiener, unknowing, and Schnitzel. Send me back to Doppelbach, uncertainty, the mountains, and the mountain hostel. I miss the rumpled earth. I miss the 90s. Send me back to Gimmelwald, to my pack and flask, my abandoned map and Eurail pass, to sweating the too little left in my earthly accounts and the sky blue box of camels I smoked unrepentant on a sunny day, awaiting a train to Interlaken, to Prague, to a profound lust or a petty love maybe, and flaming absence in the lung cut of Slavic winter. Unpunch my loyalty card, and heaven release me from the quid pro quo of devotion, my humility exchanged for your cache of dead pets and relatives chit-chatting at an unrelenting buffet, my chastity for your answer key, and expel me into the dizzy of morning, 1999, the fidget of waiting for a train. What wonders in the goddamn Gimmelwald of my good brain. I was thinking about how, like, when you're dead, like, this was the weirdest part of how all these people who believe in the afterlife, like, everything takes place in your brain. And then if you're dead, you're not in your brain anymore. And I was like, I had that moment of like, I kind of like being in my own brain, and I would rather be there than whatever the other alternative is. So Gimmelwald became that. I'm gonna read one last poem from here, and then maybe I'll just read like a couple poems from the new book. And I wrote this poem long before I was married or had a kid. And I was thinking about, speaking of like afterlives and things like that, the ways in which like all of our ancestors, and I think this goes across like the entire evolution of multiple species, they're all kind of contained in your genetics, right? So like all of your past family members are, some portion of genetic code is just all in there. And I was thinking like ultimately that feels like where all of us end up. If, you know, even if you don't yourself have offspring, like some portion of shared genetics go on, you know, in other people. And so I was thinking about thinking about that and kind of addressing some descendant in the future. And I wrote this poem called Self-Portrait as a Gene Sequence. If this transmission should find you continents removed from my last confirmed location, in your era of no-go glaciers, where your people tinder the jungle and marsh make their tundra, and you're reading this there on your screen porch in the Tropic of Glasgow, where you awoke this morning to what seemed at first a loon beneath your pillow, but turned out to be an errant tsunami siren looning through an open window from a tranquil valley nearer the coast. If you have on a sundress in curl-kinking humidity, in dense air greasing your brown skin while puffed sails bob like dunce caps on a firth beneath contrails of space planes too distant to hear, while children ricochet around your yard in polymer rompers, when the youngest, the big-nosed sentimental one with a freckle on his right nostril, with a hint of a lisp and a penchant for ketchup on his crackers, stops his slug hunt in the garden to peer at the city center in the lowlands through kilometers of smog. If he interrupts your bagel and reading to ask what the cranes down there are building, or how the cranes are built, if he asks about the inception of metallurgy or the invention of glass, why is there brick, steel, and siding? Why is there duct tape instead of nothing? As you're reading this there in that nation, World Cups and World Cups hence, and you find yourself uncertain of how to begin, hand him your hammer. Show him his elbow should make like a lever, his wrist a hinge. Tell him to mix his water into concrete, not the concrete into water. He should stagger his blockwork and toenail his jack studs. You should soap test his gas lines, pressure test his valves, trip every circuit before he messes with any electric, then explain how the builders are lesser than the building, the tool makers lesser than the tools. No one will look on his works in despair, but he might make time at a half, evenings and weekends. He might manage vision and dental and retire with a pension. Certainly he'll drink too much, but all of that will come later. Now smooth the cowlick jutting from the cyclone of hair at the crown of his head like humans do. Don't mention the rest of us punched silent rivets in his cell walls, us proteins that rebar his brick face, that buttress his animal architecture, now warm, now capable, now built of the junkyard dead. There was a bonus Keats reference for you, James, at the end of that poem. All right, I'm gonna wrap up with a couple of newer poems that are from this yet to be released book, whose title is English as a Second Language and Other Poems. And so I'm going to read the title poem, English as a Second Language. My dad tells a story about how when he moved to London when he was about 18, from India, he was, they were mostly working a lot, but every so often have a day off and they'd go, and he went to the Kew Gardens with a couple of friends, and there was somebody selling hot dogs. And if English is your second language and you see the words hot dog, you're going to think that people are eating dogs. And so this is a poem that kind of retells that story in my own way, and it ends up being the title poem for the new book, English as a Second Language. We came upon a line of English, eating dog, we thought, on plump bread steamed and slathered with a drab yellow chutney from a cart in the Kew Gardens. Wankers they looked to us, offending nature, but we asked the dogwalla for one apiece. Me, your Gyan uncle, and the elder Sahota, who held up 7 fingers, then pointed to the sky, a coat of theirs he'd broken. The dogwalla just shook his head, counted our shillings, and surrendered 3 green glass bottles of 7-Up, 3 warm logs, and aluminium. In 1967, you could hear a song by the Beatles on anybody's radio. But what did the Beatles know about us, huddled together in our conspiracy on a bench beneath a kind of tree I'd never seen before? Anyway, we were young and having fun. The shit-eating grin on Gyan's face as we brought the dog meat to our mouths. When you sack the wanker's estate, you have to eat from the wanker's kitchen. You dress in his topcoat and drink his gin. You set his horses free and drive them home through the rain. You see, we weren't afraid. We didn't come here to become like them. We came here to plunder. And I will close by, maybe I'll just read the last poem in this collection. It's kind of a downer though, but all right, maybe it's not that much of a downer. All right, I'm gonna read this last poem in the collection, which feels appropriate since it was, takes place kind of in the very space I've been stuck in for the last week in quarantine. And it is called Lines Composed Upon Changing a Diaper, which of course is a nod to Wordsworth. I don't know if, did Wordsworth ever change a diaper, do we think? I don't know. All right, Lines Composed Upon Changing a Diaper. Marion upstairs is anxious for an update from the extended care facility where her husband is dying. 4 blue macaws bustle through the airspace above the neighborhood. Her footfalls go cursing from room to room. Here, the toddler testifies no poops, but the toddler is lying. I tell him there are 9 spiders living inside the walls for every person in a building. They spin their twilight colonies in an alternate dimension rippling beneath the drywall. Termites romancing in the joists. We worry about so much more than ourselves, I tell him. But I tell him it'll all be all right, because it'll all be all right, though not all of us will live long enough to agree. One night, we hear Marion's husband has broken back into himself through a skylight in his own mind, demanding to see his wife again, demanding the nurses release him again, demanding a Reuben from a diner in Brooklyn that folded in 1996, but by morning, he's ghosted back into his framework. From the exterior view, birth is exactly as inevitable as death. I know not the schematics of why, baby, but I remain devoted to my task, wiping you clean, buttoning you up, answering your every complaint with a grammar you don't understand. And I'm going to end there. So thank you all for your attention, and thank you for hosting me. And yeah, I'd be happy to, if there are questions, I guess I could take questions.
When's the new book coming out?
I don't know if it's going to be spring or fall, but it's 2023 for sure. It's just I'm waiting for an update on publication calendar because some other book might get bumped and then I'll be in spring, and if it doesn't, then I'll be in fall of 2023.
What's it coming out? What press?
Copper Canyon.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm happy about that.
That's
so
awesome. I love the title, and I love the title poem.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm gonna end up having to put, like, we haven't even put it together yet, but I think I'm gonna have to put like a hot dog on the cover because there are about 3 different poems that reference hot dogs, which it became deliberate because the full title of the book is English as a Second Language and Other Poems, or The Usual Entertainment. And The Usual Entertainment, well, I guess the long short story is that there's a quote at Hadrian's tomb, at mausoleum in Rome, from this like kind of fake book by Marguerite Yourcenar called Memoirs of Hadrian. But the quote that I saw when I was there is not the quote that's in the book. It's the weirdest thing, but the quote is like, it's him addressing his own soul, kind of saying like, get ready to go down to the dark and dreary places where you will no longer have the usual entertainment. And so I really loved that idea of like all of life as being the usual entertainment. And I mean, I'm not doing justice to the quote, but then I wrote my own version of The Usual Entertainment. It ended up being like a poem about eating hot dogs in the stands at Wrigley Field. And then I had this other poem about my dad's first time eating a hot dog. And I was like, well, it's just a book about hot dogs, I guess. And so that seemed appropriate.
Which is appropriate for you.
Yeah.
Hot dogs or Burger King. One
yeah, that's right. One or the other.
Yeah. Anybody questions? I'll open it up.
I might ask one. Hi again.
Hey Dan, good to see you again.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this. This is great to listen to. And I was struck by the last poem, the sort of the appearance of sort of parental domestic duties. This is one of those self-serving questions where it's really, I'm thinking about my own shit, so I'm going to ask you about my shit, right?
Yeah.
But I write a lot about fatherhood, and I've been getting a lot of questions myself about like, is there a lineage? Is there a sort of a history of fatherhood poetry that I had been leaning on? Is that something like, did you think about that domestic space as something that you saw a clear path through history toward for yourself, or is that you just writing what's in your life? Like,
yeah, no, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, like there are poems, it's not just about like fatherhood, but like parenthood, more generally. But yeah, like I think it's a really ripe area for poets because you get to contrast the kind of like world weariness of the speaker with the naivete of the kid, right? And like Maggie Smith has that Good Bones poem that went crazy viral, and like but that's what a lot of these poems do. I think about oh my god, those Dark Sundays. What is that poem called? Is that the Levine poem?
Hayden, Those Winter Sundays.
Hayden, right? Those Winter Sundays, right. So like, but that, like, there, and Philip Levine, speaking of which, has these poems about like his, so there's like the perspective of the child looking at the parent and the parent looking at the child, and we know there's that gap between just knowledge and experience. So I think it makes it really kind of ripe for poetry. But I think I had some of those poems in the back of my head when I wrote some of the ones here, but really the truth is that it is, you're writing about what's in your life. And for me, it is what I was saying, and thank you for attending the thing earlier, but like, it's just the thing that I was saying there too. It's like, hey, here's an opportunity for me to get like poop into a poem, like, because my kid actually used to do that. Now he's marginally potty trained, and but for like a while there, it was, you'd be like, hey, we got to change your diaper, and he'd be like, no poops, and you'd be like, there's poops, man, I can smell them, I know. And that's like such a part of like human experience, that like why that's not been in a poem previously drove me up the wall. So I was like, it was just an opportunity to get more language in, and that language was just everywhere. I've got poems in this new collection about like our completely awesome wacky pediatrician who retired during the pandemic, unfortunately, but like, we've just got so many weird things. And of course, because it's me, I always end up linking, like in that poem, changing the kid's diaper to like thinking about the neighbor's husband, and like that weird moment where you're taking care of your own kid and you're being like, oh crap, I'm gonna like die and this kid's gonna have to deal with this. And how do I explain this to this kid? And you're like, you don't have to, he's like a child, but and so it's just that weird, I think, yeah, you write your own experience. At least I write my own experience, but I wasn't thinking of like that lineage. I mean, do you think of that? Like, do you have like poets you look at, or?
Well, I mean, for that particular thing, I don't know, I became sort of hyper conscious as I couldn't get my kid out of my poems
Mhm.
of how unusual that was, particularly for a man, historically. But then it's not particularly unusual right now. I think there are a lot of us who are just like participating in more of the domestic, work that was historically, coded as feminine in a very
Yeah.
limited way. And then I think the way you described it is actually very much in line with how I feel about it, in terms of like, there's access to a quality of language here and a quality of experience that historically men have neglected to their detriment,
Yeah.
in a variety of ways, in the detriment of the world at large.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I mean, yeah, and it's just it's a pity. And you're right, it is happening more and more. I think there are like a bunch of books, like as Zabreeder's got that book Father's Day out, and others have like embracing. But yeah, I mean, what's funny is I try so hard to be so part of this kid's life, and still it is just mama, mama, mama. I want mama. Like the number one phrase out of that kid's mouth is mama, I want to be with you. He'll like walk right past me saying that. And I'm like, dude, I changed like I put you to bed, I bathe you, I take you to school, I pick you up, and just, yeah, where's mama? And I'm like, it does not matter. Does not matter what I do. And so I'm glad to be taking on that some of those responsibilities that prior generations did not. But I think the best part about it is how humbling it is, because holy shit, do they not care? Like, it's kind of, it's perfect, I guess.
I will never write about
Awesome.
my kids. I sat them both down at
Yeah.
about 2 years old.
Yeah.
And I said, you will never appear in my writing. As far as my writing concerns, you don't exist.
Wow,
They
that's
took it
great.
well.
And JJ, thank you for that in the chat. That I hope that's what everybody tells me, is that he'll appreciate me the older he gets, or he'll just be like, that sad old bastard. He's always just meditating on death again, isn't he?
No,
Just
yeah.
cheap.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, like I just for myself, like personal experience with growing up, like you never really realize how much you truly need your parents and their words of wisdom and how much they guide you. So yeah, give him some time. He has
I'll give him some time, but
he has a lot of
man,
living to do, a lot of experiencing where he's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I need my dad. So
I'm waiting for that. He started just in the last few weeks. I heard the phrase, Dada, I want to be with you. And I was like, don't ruin this. Don't screw this up. Don't overreact.
This is my mistake.
But then of course I've been in this room, this guest room office of mine for like 2 days in quarantine. And then I finally like came out with like a mask, and I'm like, Parent, I'm so happy to see you. Aren't you happy to see that? And he just kind of looked at me, was like, Dad, don't you have to go back in your office? And I was like, oh, come on. Like, but yeah, constant. But yeah, so Dan, the kid is all over the new collection, but I didn't have the steely resolve of James to eject my children or my child from all my work. Not yet, anyway.
You can't spoil them.
No, yeah. Don't let them think highly of them.
Does anybody else have any questions for Jaswinder? We're coming up on 8:30 here, but if anybody else has maybe a final question, we can do that.
You don't have to have a question. That's all right too.
Or we could call it. Jaswinder, so appreciative of you doing this under the circumstances in quarantine. I kind of feel like it kind of feels like you're on the International Space Station and you've been there for a while. We're patching into you.
Yeah. Well, I felt so terrible that like when I sent you that text, I sent James a picture of my COVID test, like my at home thing, and I just got in all caps, I think the F word back. And I was like, and he's like, wait, but when do you fly out? Like, you don't fly out till Wednesday. And I was like, he's like, what are the quarantine rules now? I'm like, James, I don't think it's gonna happen, man. It's like it's Monday. I feel terrible. And I felt terrible like physically, but I also just felt terrible emotionally because I was like, I so badly wanted to just come up there and meet people. I always prefer being in person. So it just
Oh, that actually brings up a good point for the couple of students that we have here and for the folks who might watch this afterwards. Jaswinder is coming up in person from June 1st to June 3rd. And if any students are around who would like to participate in helping to design a run of broadsides of one of Jaswinder's poems, please, I'll keep everybody in the loop and we can do that. But he will be here in person.
yes, and yeah, thank you, and thanks to all of you for arranging that and making that happen, because that was, yeah, Dan, thank you to you, James, everybody, because I was like super bummed. And I think the second thing I texted James is like, I have not seen Lauren in so many years that I was so bummed that I wasn't going to be there. So I'm glad that that is going to happen. And we'll just
do.
yeah, I can't wait to see you either. And Murray, why don't you drive up? We're all here. You and Britt should drive up.
Come up from Philly.
Yeah.
Why not? I'll make the trip.
Yeah, that's only what, like a 3.5 hour drive. You could do that.
Yeah, it's easy.
Yeah, and like I was saying to James earlier, I'm like, I'm the safest person to be around. There's no way I'm bringing COVID up by then. I've already had it, and I'm like triple boosted, and so I like, it'll be a completely safe.
Now, why would you say that out loud?
I'm tempting fate. You know me. I'll always tempt fate if given the opportunity.
Yeah. I'm gonna stop recording and edit out some of